In this session, I want to encourage you in the work that you're doing because you're doing a great work. So we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to give you a little bit of intro about me. I don't know, is this your second year here? Or are you all new teachers? Or who is a new teacher? Brand new. Have you ever taught in a classical school before? Well, great. This will be an exciting opportunity for you. Wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My husband and I have 6 children. Our baby is 24. And so they're gone. They're actually all married. And we homeschooled all of our children K through 12. And as they finished, I began teaching at a Christian school and then became the administrator there, and then we transitioned our school from a Christian school to a classical Christian school, and along the way picked up Memoria Press curriculum. And when I was going to step out of the school, Memoria Press asked me to join them. So now I work for Memoria Press. We publish classical Christian curriculum, and I work with schools from Texas to the West Coast. So I live in Arizona. I live when I'm not traveling. I get to escape to the solitude of the mountains, the San Francisco peaks. I can see them from my front porch. And I live on a not 100,000 acre cattle ranch, 150,000. My son corrected me on that. He said, "Oh, Mom, no, it's 150. Okay. But you need a lot of acres when you don't have a lot of grass, right? So God is extremely good to us, and He has been good to me, and He has been good to you to allow you to teach in a classical school. This is a grand, grand thing. So, here we are. We're heading toward the end of another school year. How are you?
Relax.
How has your year been? It will be over in 8 weeks. Wow. When you reach the end of the year, will you look back with a sense of satisfaction, knowing you did everything you could and should to pour all that is true and good and beautiful into the hearts and minds of your students? Think about that. It is a grand and glorious privilege that you've been given. Each day is a gift, and it's not to be taken lightly. It's important that we as educators realize the importance of our job, though not the importance of ourselves. We must realize that what we are responsible for, the mark we make on a human soul, the memory we leave in our students' lives. Several years ago, when I was an administrator, I was taking a tour, a prospective parent, through the school, and she remarked, "It's like they're your flowers, and this is a garden." And indeed, as we minister to the students in our schools, the analogy of gardening is clearly seen. We wish to plant the seeds of wisdom and virtue. We hope to find the best ways to nourish those seeds so that they will grow into healthy plants and bring the desired fruit of learning. There are certain steps we can take to ensure healthy growth, for our students cannot grow or be sustained if they are not healthy. Our goal, in truth, is to create healthy schools as opposed to simply having numeric growth. Numeric growth is what the world is interested in. We are interested in the human person growing. So saying, I'd like to introduce this talk with a memory. So sit back. And let me take you to a place that you may remember, for you may have had this very experience. When I was a little girl, I helped my father plant a garden. He was a master gardener, not in the sense of taking a course, although he held a degree in agriculture. No, he was a master gardener in the fact of loving plants and loving the process of gardening from beginning to end. Before the seeds were planted, the earth must be tilled, the little tractor pulling the plow, disturbing the rocks that grow so well, and turning over the sod. My father knew the ground would need to be turned over several times, that fertilizer must be mixed in. He measured each row, tying string to stakes at each end to ensure the rows were straight. Each row was hoed just deep enough for a seed to be planted, but not so deep that the seeds could not grow. I walked along as a child, dropping corn kernels in the row, strategically placed 2 at a time. I love the bright pink color because at that time, seeds were treated with chemicals before you put them in the ground. We must be careful not to put the kernels either too close or too far apart. Cucumbers, squash, and pumpkins were different. They must be planted in small mounds and given freedom to roam. We worked together, the children doing their part, my father leading the way. This was his specialty, and my mother was nowhere to be seen. She loved her music. He loved his plants and his books. He found great solace in escaping city life, in buying a country home, surrounding himself with books, animals, and growing things. We looked forward to the time when the corn grew high and ripened, tassels turning brown, and a summer evening consisted of shucking the ears, boiling the corn, slathering it with butter, sprinkling it with salt, and feeling the soft kernels pop as the juice ran down our chins. The room was full of laughter and talk, and life was simple and good. It was August, and school would not begin until after Labor Day. It was a distant thought. As children, we did not realize the beauty of this experience, foolish as we were. We did not realize these days would be treasured in years to come, and that was just as it should be. For children do not need the burden of being made to appreciate the everydayness of life. They must be allowed to live each day fully, and memories will appear in their older years when they are needed. During the winter months, in between reading Solzhenitsyn in front of a roaring fire and journeying with us through the Little House books, our father studied seed magazines and planned his garden. The gardens grew as the years went by to include 3 separate glorious spaces. Gourds were grown simply for their beauty and laid out to dry and then to be shellacked to a lovely shine and shaken with vigor by certain children to hear the seeds rattle. These were used purely for decoration and enjoyment. So, what has this to do with education? It's all a lovely memory, but what has it to do with learning and a gathering of educators, and how does it lend itself to healthy growth in a school? Far more than the casual observer might note. Just as the eternal story set the stage for every story that has ever followed, just so God's directive to Adam to dress and keep the garden calls us to contemplate gardens and growing things and to learn from Eden. Every farmer desires to grow a healthy garden. The preparation of the ground is as important to growing healthy plants as is the actual planting, and this is just as important when we deal with education. Our concern in this gathering is the tending of our schools, our gardens of students, and how we will affect their eventual maturation. Let us listen to Plutarch on this subject. He says, "We now reach a topic more important and vital than any yet treated, that of the right teachers for our children. The kind to be sought," I want you to listen, are you this teacher? "The kind to be sought are those whose lives are irreproachable, whose characters are unimpugned, and whose skill and experience are of the best. The root or fountainhead of character as a man and a gentleman lies in receiving the proper education. When children reach the age to be put under a mentor, it becomes especially necessary to take pains in the appointment of such a person. Otherwise, we shall have entrusted them to some uncivilized or rascally fellow. As farmers put stakes beside their plants, so the right kind of teacher provides firm support for the young in the shape of lessons and admonitions, carefully chosen to produce an upright growth of character." Plutarch. We can build beautiful structures in which to educate children, and we should. We can provide the best of books and the finest furniture, and we should. But we will never grow a truly healthy school until we as teachers realize the importance of our role in the garden of education. Notice I am not saying until people realize the importance of teachers. I am not saying that. I am saying it is important for teachers to see this, not because of who you are, but because of what you do. You have huge responsibility and tremendous power. It is not merely earning a degree. I've met far too many people in my travels, and I deal with a lot of schools who have degrees flowing out of their ears and foolishness pouring out of their mouths. No, the job of the teacher is much larger. You must be ever reading, ever growing, ever taking in. For as we know, you cannot give what you do not have. Your teaching must come from the overflow. You must adhere to the words of Quintilian when he said, "We must form our minds by reading deep rather than wide. Multum non multa," it's the Latin for much, not many. Let us do less and go deep. One of the frightening things that has occurred in modern education is this thought that if I attend this many years of college, I have arrived. We never arrive. We never reach an end of learning. The role of the teacher in the classroom is large enough to be frightening. Your effect on each of your students is monumental. We can all remember the teachers in our lives. If you think about that, you can remember them. They have all left a mark, and they have either helped or hindered our growth. They've either watered the seed of knowledge we possessed or left us dry and barren. You are not in the classroom to regurgitate facts you accrued in college. Yours is a noble profession, for you are following the lead of the master, and you must always remember that. As teachers, you are gardeners or farmers. You are involved in preparing the soil, softening the ground, making it ready for planting. You place the seed of learning gently yet firmly in each little heart and mind. Carefully you tend each student, knowing each one and guiding them as they learn. You wish to leave a lasting impact, and you will, though whether for good or bad is up to you. Listen as I share with you the job of the farmer, and think about yourself in the classroom. This is from Farmer Boy, where the curriculum that we develop, Farmer Boy, is in our third grade literature. But this is from Farmer Boy. And you, the teacher, are Almanzo, and you are involved in the work of planting. There was no time to lose, no time to waste in rest or play. The life of the earth comes up with a rush in the springtime. All the wild seeds of weed and thistle, the sprouts of vine and bush and tree are trying to take the fields. Farmers must fight them with harrow and plow and hoe. They must plant the good seeds quickly. Almanzo was a little soldier in this great battle. From dawn to dark he worked. From dark to dawn he slept. Then he was up again and moving. Potato plants have blossoms and seeds, but no one knows what kind of potato will grow from a potato seed. All of the potatoes that have ever been grown have come from one potato. A potato is not a seed. It is a part of a potato plant's root. Cut it up and plant it, and it will always make more potatoes, just like itself. Every potato has several little dents in it that look like eyes. From these eyes, the little roots grow down into the soil, and little leaves push up toward the sun. They eat the piece of potato while they are small, before they are strong enough. They eat up the piece of potato while they are small, before they are strong enough to take their food from the earth and the air. And this is your life as a teacher. It is large and wonderful and full of excitement. You have no time to waste. Your students are sometimes like wild seeds blowing about in the wind. They are as young sprouts, and your job is to care for them, to direct them, to help them to develop strong roots. Just as Almanzo was exhausted at the end of the day, so too are you. You work hard and you love it. And a good teacher is always exhausted at the end of the day. You do not know what any of your students will turn out to be. As the roots of potato grow from the eyes, so the teaching that you've placed in your students will take root and produce. All of this gives pause for thinking, for self-examination. Am I that teacher? Have I taken the time to think through the importance of what I am doing in the classroom? Am I learning and training my mind? We live in a trivial society, and we are swimming against the current of the present time in our pursuit of a truly classical education. There are now more ways to communicate than ever before, and yet relationships are fragmented and deep conversations are few. I think we can all admit this. I can remember a time, and this really dates me, and I can't believe I'm saying I can remember a time. But you know, when we were children, we might go for 2 years without taking a picture. We lived our life as it came along. We didn't wear protectants on our knees when we rode our bikes or helmets on our head. We fell down and skinned our knees and learned good balance. We didn't always think there was something around the corner that would be bad, and if we rode our bike, we might get a concussion. That did not occur to us. We happily participated in life. And so we live in a different place now where people, you can't put down your phone, we must text, we must be available to everyone all of the time. And this is not healthy. Civil discourse has all but ceased to exist as our loss of language skills renders us unable to discuss differing viewpoints. We wish to teach our students how to think, that they may know what to do. We wish to teach them how to speak, that they may learn the art of discussion, something that has been lost and is being lost more and more because of all our technology. So we don't have that closeness with people that we used to have, the way God created us, to communicate with one another, to sit at the end of the day around a table and converse over a beautiful meal, to create that place of community within our homes where our children are comfortable and come home at the end of the day and relax because now they are in the most wonderful place in the world, and that is home. And I look at mom and dad and I discuss and we talk. The work you're doing in your classrooms has now become more important than ever. In a world where screen time reigns supreme, you have the opportunity to separate eyes and ears from their devices and direct their souls to true learning. You have the opportunity to prepare young minds for big thoughts. If we are to grow healthy schools, we must pay attention to our gardens of learning. I want to share some thoughts from Chesterton, my dear friend. And if you read Chesterton, you will just enjoy him so much. And it causes us to think about the job of teaching. He says, "A child kicks his legs rhythmically through excess, not absence of life, because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free. Therefore, they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, 'Do it again,' and the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony." Grammar stage, do it again, memorize again and again. God says in the Bible, say these words to your children when you get up, when you sit down. Then you have the teacher saying, "I told you that." You did. And you'll tell them again. Because it's just as it should be. That's your job. Right? I will add this other part that Chesterton wrote following that, because it's just so good. He says, "But perhaps God is strong enough to exult." He says, grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he is the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. Very interesting. God never tires like we do. Quintillions, before I read that, children thrive in the expected. You know that, right? In your classroom, you have that schedule. They will be more secure if you have that schedule. They know what's coming up. They thrive in the expected, the repeated, the unchanged. In other words, order. Contrary to what the world will tell you, children thrive in order. What is in our world defined as the dreadful word order and viewed as monotonous is in truth one of the keys that opens the door to a healthy classroom. When the young student knows his day is structured, he is then free to learn without any insecurities about what is to come next. He can completely commit himself to the learning process because he knows his teacher is in charge and his teacher has planned that day and structured that day. And so he has no worries. It is just the opposite of the progressive mentality that says children are innately aware of what is best and must always be entertained with the newest, the brightest, the shiniest object. Please don't fall for that. That is so progressive. It was the progressive John Dewey who proclaimed, John Dewey actually said this. I read his words. We must not use rote memorization because it will cause the children to be submissive to authority. As if that's a bad thing. The teacher is not the court jester. The teacher is the leader. Quintillion says in his directives to teachers, whether those at home or in a classroom, he says, let him, the teacher, be strict but not austere, genial but not too familiar, for austerity will make him unpopular and familiarity breeds contempt. Let his discourse continually turn on what is good and honorable. The more he admonishes, the less he will have to punish. He must control his temper without, however, shutting his eyes to faults requiring correction. It's a balance, isn't it? But it's a balance with love and kindness and goodness to our students. Imagine the garden, run amok, allowed to grow without any order. Plants spring up everywhere, to the extent that we cannot tell what is a vegetable, an herb, a weed. The lazy farmer is the one who simply rushes to accomplish the task of planting. The soil isn't prepared well. The rows are not straight. The seeds are scattered hither and yon. By the way, the phrase hither and yon used to be a common phrase. I understand people don't say it much nowadays because someone mentioned that to me and I had no clue. So I am going to use it increasingly because I feel it's important. So, because our language is under attack, right? People are texting with letters for words and putting in pictures instead of words. I thought that cavemen drew pictures on walls, but now I find we have them on our phones instead of words. And this is difficult for me. I insist on using whole words in texts and chats. And they have found in the home office that I do not put pictures of smiling faces places. And I might even say chuckle rather than LOL. So words are important. And we need to realize that those who know how to use words and use them properly are going to be those that will have an effect on the world. And so in your classical schools, I give you no excuse. You must raise your level of speech, for you are important. Double negatives will not reign in your classroom. I just thought I'd throw that in there. Okay. So the lazy farmer, his garden is a mess. He has not prepared the soil. He does not have the straight lines. By the way, have any of you planted a garden and put the strings and the stakes? And I mean, we used to do it. It was a beautiful thing. My father's garden was just a work of art. It was just lovely. Anyway, so when we have that messy garden, that is what we get when we embrace the mentality of progressive education. Chaotic classrooms, insecure children who are unwilling to learn and unable to focus. Your job as a teacher is not to put on a show. It is to teach. Could it be that this is something to think about, that so many of the behavioral issues we see in the classrooms of today are a result of the loss of order in our classrooms, our gardens of learning? But think of the garden you will tend. Straight rows of learning, calm rooms, promoting calm minds. Peace is the tranquility of order, Aquinas says. Peace is the tranquility of order. Let the changing winds of educational solutions blow over your garden. Your plants are protected and nurtured. You know what to do to grow strong plants. You do not follow the latest fad. Oh, please don't do that. You know the tried and true, and there will be many fads. I think we can see in the United States that we have another plan come by every 5 years. You know, it was Common Core, and it was whatever one under the Bush presidency. No Child Left Behind, and all the children were left behind. And so in Common Core, all the children became common. And so we know there will always be another plan, another fad, another thing that is coming through. But when we deal with classical education, we are dealing with a type of education that is 2,000 years old. It is the old and the good, right? And so we can trust it. It has been proven. When we look at the founders of our country, what type of education did they have? Where all these beautiful documents came about, and they're so beautifully written, and the words, oh my goodness, the average American cannot even understand the words in our founding documents. Oh dear, did you know they had a classical education? And oh my, did you know they all had to take Latin? Everyone, the root of the English language. Don't even get me started on Latin. Yes, very, very important. So don't go after the progressive mentality. Question, I would say this, in your classrooms, when you're teaching and you get an idea to go down another path than maybe what your administrator has instructed, question yourself. Stop right there and say, is this something I learned in college from a progressive mentality, or is this really right? I mean, I need to question that. Everybody in this room, we need to question ourselves on those things, because I would, maybe there's somebody here who had a classical education completely, but I'm thinking no. We are all relearning, rethinking. Don't be intimidated. It's okay. This is called growth, and we're supposed to do that. And we will do that for the rest of our lives. So, before you kind of get a complaint or anything, question yourself and say, wait a minute, why am I thinking this thing? Is this the way, is this something in my education that I need to correct? So, because all of us now live in an age where if you've had how many people went to a public school? Okay, so you had a progressive education. Now, those of you who didn't go to a public school, you were taught by people who probably went to a public school. So, we've been affected. And our culture, it affects us. It's like me, right? And not about sacrifice. So we need to think about that when you make decisions as a teacher. It is truly a joy to be able to look for ways to nurture our students, to prepare our rooms, to make them lovely. I hope you make your room lovely. You don't have to make it pretty. make it lovely, right? We don't want garishness. We want a calm and beautiful classroom, a few nice works of art on the wall, something to help our children focus on true learning, right? It's not the mentality of these days where everything is bright and we have to have every color in the world. Make it calm and beautiful. That's a good thing. So it is truly a joy to be able to do that. In the summer months, which are coming up, one has time to read and plan. For a good teacher is always planning. I know how it is for you. When you go home at the end of the day, your mind is still there and you're already thinking, okay, and tomorrow, blah, 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 right? So we want to plan as much as possible and make your way prepared before you so you're not always running to keep up. Just as the gardener plants his garden, where each row should be situated and what plants are best to keep near or far from each other. We know certain of our plants we need to keep far from each other. So too, a teacher plans his classroom. 3 months into the school year, our planning and planting begins to show signs of growth. A few sprouts are pushing up out of the soil. The kindergarten class is starting to read small CVC words. What does that mean?
It's fine, just normal alarm.
Oh, okay. So the kindergarten class, 3 months in, they're starting to read small CVC words in our curriculum anyway. The grammar students are beginning to spout Latin, that beautiful language. There is an atmosphere of expectancy about the place. Something is happening. You've had new students come in. They're 3 months in. Their parents are so happy. Everything is moving along just as it should. In February, you will look back and remember the early signs of growth, and it will seem so long ago. For you, like any gardener, will marvel at the change you've seen in your garden. Plants grow quickly when they are nurtured well. And you are on your way to becoming a master gardener. As you draw closer to the end of the year, you begin to contemplate how your little plants will soon be ready for the next stage of growth. And you will prepare them to be handed off to the next gardener, who will place them in new soil and continue the growing process. And that's hard sometimes, isn't it? Because we love our students and we know they have to go on. But when we look back over the year, we see marvelous growth. And that is such a wonderful thing. And that is the satisfaction of the teacher when you see how they've stepped up in all of these areas. While present-day psychology would say that the most important points to focus on in our teaching are problem solving, creativity, personal communication, which I've never known why they think we need to help children with their communication. It's like they're pretty good at that. But anyway, we realize that teaching clear and dedicated subjects committed to delivering defined knowledge will produce students who are able also to problem solve, create, and communicate. We don't need to teach communication when we are teaching good subject matter that then produces that. That is best done when we have our order set for the day. You have to have your order set for the day. You can't be stressed enough. Orderly classrooms are good for the mind. Order and structure are powerful components. They are the string between the stakes to guide us in planting a straight row. Think about this. Contrary to popular opinion in our freewheeling and ever emotionally driven society, a structured classroom helps students to relax. Why? Because when they enter the room, they know that it has been prepared for them. They're able to leave all else behind, focus on work at hand, and that prepares the mind for intense study. Order is sometimes offensive to those in the progressive world. I think you can see this in our society where nobody wants to dress up, everybody wants to lounge, and heaven forbid if you look nice. We need to think about that. The reason why progressives don't like order to that extent, or moderns. I like to call people moderns. That's not a good term. Is because to believe in order is to believe that there is a right and wrong. And then that leads to admitting that there is absolute truth. And when we admit to absolute truth, we must then make the choice as to whether we will adhere to that or not. So it's okay to be orderly. Dale Ahlquist, in his book, The Complete Thinker, he writes of Chesterton. Dale Ahlquist is a Chesterton authority. And he writes really well. I think he's read so much Chesterton that he writes like Chesterton now. It's just really something. But he talks of how Chesterton decried the change in society's educational values. And listen to what he said. The colleges and universities, whose job it was to teach, that is, to pass the great things of one generation to the next generation, to preserve the culture, to treasure the past, were instead mocking tradition and praising innovation, tripping over themselves to be progressive and rallying the young against the old. This referred to the year 1906. We are now 100 years later. How much farther we have strayed. And yet, it's the age-old story of mankind choosing his own way and thinking foolishly that his is better. But do not despair. There is hope. There is you. The work you are doing in your classrooms is a mighty work. Just as the farmer sometimes seems overwhelmed in all that has to be done, so will you at times. But you will continue because you know this is valuable work. It is good and it is great. How do we grow healthy schools and sustain them? We continue to pass on the great things to preserve the culture, to preserve the past. We do not mock tradition, nor praise innovation just for the sake of change. With gratefulness, we acknowledge the wisdom of the ancients, and we humbly learn. Let us never hear a second-grade teacher suggest hers is a lowly profession. Let us never see a teacher of rhetoric roll his eyes and throw up his hands. Never shall we hear a logic school teacher complain that his students are not logical. Let us always hear them talk of the joy of teaching, the beauty of the individual souls to which they minister. Let us feel their excitement at the opportunity to share all that is true and good and beautiful in a world that is often dark and ugly. What is the key to healthy growth in a school? It is following the old ways. Not because they are old, but because they are good. And they are good. Remember that. When you are tempted to follow the latest fad, remember that the old ways are the good ways. Remember that the founding documents of our country, so beautifully written, the language so beautifully used, came from a classical education that is old, and it is good. In my house, there is a saying carved in wood and hanging on my wall. My daughter had it made for me. And it says, tradition is the framework we hang our lives upon. And in so many ways, that is true. But what to do when the tradition begins to disappear? When the understood fades? When the lines of truth become blurred? That is where our work begins. The work you are doing in small schools, and raise your hand if you teach in a small school. So, are there any schools here that are over 300 students? Are there any schools here that are over 250 students? So you're between 250 and 3. Okay, we would still consider that a small school in the realm of things. But do we have any schools here that are under 75 students? You have 75 or less? 100 or less? 100 or less, okay. Most of the schools, I travel, so I work for Memoria Press, and I help schools implement curriculum, do training of teachers and how to use, for instance, if they've ordered a part of our curriculum but they don't know how to teach it in the classroom. I go over that. I do teacher observations and help administrators and different things. So I visit a lot of schools. And granted, I work in the West. I work from Texas to the West Coast and the Northwest. So I see a lot of schools. But I would tell you this. The majority of classical schools, classical Christian schools, are small. The majority of the schools I visit are 100 students or less. Just because that's the nature of things, right? I would also say this, there are a lot of schools starting in the West, a lot of classical schools, so be encouraged. You've got other people doing this thing with you. This is an amazing work that is going on around our country and actually in other places around the world. Now, I just heard of a school in Tunisia, and they use some of our program, and they are a school of missionary children who come to one place. So it's an English-speaking school, and teaching the history of Western civilization makes sense for them, right? It would be a little hard to teach it in like Asia or something. So anyway, you know, classical education, just growing. It's a wonderful thing. It's God's work. It's from God, right? But you are important. You are a part of a big thing, and yet you are operating in a small thing. But God is using you in a great, great work. So the work you're doing in those small schools or large schools, in home schools, in cottage schools, the 2-day school, so many of them, university model, there are those schools, so many of them. These are great schools. The work you are doing is the work that is needed. That is exactly what we need. You are attending gardens. Local, belonging to a particular neighborhood, organic, derived from living matter, gardens. You are growing local, organic gardens. They will flourish, and they will produce the needed sustenance for the future of our society. Do you realize that? We are such an angry mess in our country right now. But you will walk through the middle of it with truth and beauty, and you will present what is true. And you will teach people to be able to discuss with one another and to search for truth, because there is truth. It's not your truth, my truth, and his truth. There's one truth. And we need to put that out there, and we need to help our students be able to grasp that and not be afraid to say that. In the book, A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson. Do you all love poetry? Does anyone love poetry? Please, somebody. Love poetry. Yes. Yes. And Robert Louis Stevenson, a wonderful poet. If you know about his life, he was sick often as a child, and he spent much time in bed. And I love his poem about the land of counterpane, where he's playing, and he's got the mountains on his blankets and his soldiers. And oh, it's just lovely. It's just absolutely wonderful. So, and if you ever, as an adult, you need to read A Child's Garden of Verses, the selection of his verses, because we should all have these beautiful memories, and we should be creating these for children. There is such beauty there, such wonderfulness. But he says, I want to share this poem entitled The Swing. And picture you are a child. You're 7 or 8 or 9, and you're outside, and you're swinging. You're swinging on this wooden swing. It's not a plastic one, because those are ugly and yucky. It's like a wooden swing. Okay, I know they can get splinters, but we're not going to think about that. It's a wooden swing, and it has the rope coming down, and it's tied into a strong limb of a tree. And you're on the swing, and you're just going up and down. You're pumping with your legs, and oh, it's just wonderful, and this is you. How do you like to go up in a swing, up in the air so blue? Oh, I do think it the pleasantest thing ever a child can do. up in the air and over the wall, till I can see so wide rivers and trees and cattle and all over the countryside, till I look down on the garden green, down on the roof so brown, up in the air I go flying again, up in the air and down. Part of the joy of the swing was looking down on that green garden. For a fruitful garden, a healthy garden, is a joy to behold. Your classroom is your garden, and you desire to become a master gardener. Maybe you're new to gardening. You are not of an agricultural nature, but we are all gardeners when it comes to sharing true education. Any undertaking of value takes hard work. That is a good thing. Work hard, learn, read, study. Only then will you have to give, to pour from the overflow. You do not want to study just enough to keep up. You want to know far more than your students. You want to develop as a person. You are not going to just read books that you have to read to teach the class. You will have 4 or 5 books going. One may be on classical education. One may be, I like to read Joseph Piper. He's got some great books. I'm trying to think of a title. And I just talked to someone today about this. Only the Lover Sings. Thin little book of Joseph Piper's, which is just about beauty. It's developing your understanding of God's creation. He has another one called Abuse of Language, Abuse of Power. Thin little book, won't exhaust you. Read a little bit every day. The way that when we misuse language, as society is doing, we misuse power. And so it's very important. Yes, language is very important to me. It should be important to all of us, actually, because God speaks to us through words, right? And so we as classical educators have no excuse. If we are going to participate in this excellent form of education, we need to become excellent ourselves. We need to care. We need to up our game. We need to strive for excellence. We need to learn to speak well, to write well. Very, very important. Any undertaking of value takes hard work. The ground is fertile. Let us work diligently as we are blessed to be involved in this endeavor. Your classroom is your garden. May you grow it well. I have time for some questions and answers. If you have, I have time for questions. I don't know if I have time for answers. But if you have some questions about how many new teachers do we have here? Are you already teaching? Okay, so this was your first year. So you're not new anymore. You're 3/4 of the way through the year, you know. Were there particular things that you were concerned when you started teaching in a classical school? What do you think were the things that popped out that you were most concerned about?
Well, for me, I'm K-12. I teach music to all grades.
Music!
So,
I want to live in your world. Music is wonderful.
It's a fun world, yeah.
Yes.
It can be a challenging world, but it's
Yes.
a fun world. I'm actually a product of classical Christian education, so
So you know everything?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
But what I do know is I know how little I know.
Exactly.
That's what I know.
That's what we come to, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to ask you this, because when I was an administrator, for 1 year, I had to take over the music classes because I couldn't find a music teacher that
Fit the bill.
pretty much. Because music isn't about just having a good time in the classroom and everyone jumps around. You know, we actually learn things. There's a language of music and that whole thing. Have you noticed, and maybe your school was old enough that they had already been trained, but I was very surprised that children seem to lack musicality. For instance, hitting a note on the piano, they could not match that because they had heard all sorts of music and sound, but they never participated in music. Have you found that?
Well, my experience at an ACCS school and then my musical training in that school is unique in that was a chapter in my life. And now me as an educator, it's a little bit different now, and I know, okay, I better teach some of these things, and I need to care about some of these things for various reasons, and I did not have that when I was growing up.
Right.
So that being said, I had wonderful, good musical experiences, though they were more participatory, not so much concerned about the language of music and learning music and knowing how to read music, and which I feel that was unfortunate, but that program that I was in was also growing. And so they were doing the best that they could, and they didn't know better. That being said, what I'm focusing on now is, yes, participating is very important, and hitting notes, being accurate. It's interesting because the church culture in America is a big affector in children participating in schools, musically at least. And so, for example, just in modernity, contemporary worship leaders, right? It's more of a watching, not
entertainment.
So
Yes, entertainment oriented.
So that's a big part of it.
Yes,
That's a big part
yes.
of it.
Yeah, so what we would have gotten years ago, what we did get in our churches where we all participated and we all sang and we were involved in the hymns, we don't see that. And so now we're having to backtrack and help these children to learn how to sing. Where we grew up holding hymnals and seeing all the music, we understood. That's why I say musicality.
Yeah.
I was very much surprised by the fact that these students had no sense of musicality and no sense of participating. Yeah.
And it's really important.
Interesting.
David led the army of Israel, into battle with the choir.
Right.
The choir would actually lead in the battle.
It's huge.
And the Lord tells us to praise with psalms and spiritual songs. Yeah, so it's incredibly important. And what we sing about, what we think about, that is our theology.
Yes.
And so the material and the lecture, we have to be conscious about the text.
Right, very much so. Right. Yes. Oh, you are so right. Okay, does anyone have any questions?
I did have one question.
Yes.
You mentioned that things that we want to do, examples are old ways, right? Things of old, things of antiquity, because they're good, right? And these are good things to do in how do you create a good classroom atmosphere, right? Things of antiquity, not just go by the whim of modernity and like a phase, right, or pattern, right? I agree with that, and I think traditions are good too, although traditions that are rooted in the right place,
right. Yes.
Catholicism, a lot of traditions, not always rooted in Christ-like, right? But if the tradition does come from the right place, I agree with that.
Yes.
Do you have advice on, like, what are some specific examples of traditions of antiquity that are good to implement in the classroom? And it doesn't have to be just for music, but just across the board.
Right. So I think that when we look at the traditional classical classroom, we would see there was a lot of rote memorization. Our culture today would say that's foolishness. They would be along the John Dewey mindset of, why are you doing this to these children? They won't remember it when they're older. We know that's not true. God says, plant it in your heart and it will be there. And so that would be one thing. I think the idea of structure and order in the school and in the classroom. The idea of expecting, having high expectations of behavior in the classroom. Keeping oneself controlled. That is something that traditionally we would have expected in a classroom. It's not all about the learning center and everybody expressing their opinion. The teacher is the leader. The classroom is teacher directed. In a classical education, that classroom is teacher directed. And so, I mean, is that what or is there something else that you're looking for there? Does that help at all? I am not saying that everything old is good. We don't ever want to go down that path of saying, oh, because it's old, it's good. But I am saying that many things that are old are good. And so what you want to do is really think that through. For instance, when you read the 7 Laws of Teaching, have you all read that book? Okay, and we take each chapter and we study it. Those principles that are presented, that book was written, I believe, in 1894. That is an old book. That is a good book.
Stand the test of time.
It stood the test of time, definitely. And do you know why that book was written? Does anyone know why that book was written? It was not written for schools.
For Sunday schools.
For Sunday schools, yes. So John Milton Gregory had these people teaching Sunday school in his church, and they weren't doing a good job. And he said, I will put this together and give them directives so they will know how to teach well, teach the Word of God well, and these children will learn. And here we are, all this time later, and we're still learning from that. That's a very, very good thing. So, anybody else?
You mentioned a book by Piper.
Yes, there are these
Abusive language and...
abusive language, abusive power is one, and then there's Only the Lover Sings.
It's about beauty.
It is about beauty, and they're just little essays. And those two little books are just thin little books, so we have no excuse not to read them, right? But, you should always be looking for books on classical education. Every teacher in a classical school needs to be a grower, because every person needs to be a grower. So it's understanding the whole mindset of how God deals with man. And yes, you have your particular subjects, but God desires that we continually grow in every area, that we don't have to be assigned a book to read, but that we want to find these books to read. I think a teacher needs to realize that in the class. That it affects the classroom, because there will be so much in you. It will, we say classical education, you become another person, because it's the development of the human soul through discovering wisdom and then seeing, as we become wise, it is exhibited in our lives. That's virtue, virtuous acts. But in order to do that, we must read good materials. And so that's why you always need to keep on your radar, what's another book I can read that will help me in my walk with God, in my understanding of the perspective of how I should look at life, right, from God's perspective. That's true wisdom, seeing life from God's perspective. That's what we want to do. That will help you in your classroom to love those children that are difficult too. Right? Okay, our time. Oh, go ahead.
Real quickly, towards the end of your lecture, a quote from 1906.
Yes.
Who was that?
That was Chesterton.
Okay.
Our dear Chesterton. That book is entitled The Complete Thinker. I don't know if they have it at 8th Day. They might. I might have bought it there.
Was it an essay or?
No, the book is The Complete Thinker.
It's a book.
It is by Dale Ahlquist, and it is on G.K. Chesterton. It's all about telling all about him. Dale Ahlquist, Ahlquist.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Pleasure to be with you. Enjoy your break.